Hey guys, Mr. Savage. So we've been talking a lot about Boston Massacre, we've been talking a lot about Boston Tea Party, and now it's time to really jump into the first of the fighting. Revolutionary War is about to kick off, and it's a matter of how at this point. So what I'm going to have you do while I'm explaining this first battle, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, I'd like you to do a couple different things. The first one I'd like you to do, I'd like you to keep track of time. I would like you to make a timeline. I've already given you the times, as you can see here. It's just a matter of you putting the correct information in at the correct time. This is all in military time, which can get a little confusing. 0200, for example, is 2 a.m., 0300, 3 a.m., etc., etc., etc. 1430, that's 2:30 p.m., 1530, 3:30 p.m., and then 1900, that's, 7 p.m., sorry. Yeah, it confuses me too. That's one thing I want you to do, is keep a timeline. The second thing I'd like you to do is we're going to do like a choose your own adventure. I'm going to give you a couple choices, and this is where you definitely have to pause it to be able to like press pause, write down your choice, press unpause, see what actually happens. You'll see what I mean in a moment, and I'll show you like exactly what to do here. But you have the choices here. You have 13 different choices you're going to have to record, and you have the timeline. Just keep that in mind, okay? You got to do these two things. You're also going to have 2 days to do this because this is a little longer. It takes a little more time, and I'm asking you to do a bunch of stuff, okay? So, after the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party happened. I think we know that one quite well already. Because of the Boston Tea Party, there's a bunch of intolerable acts that were placed on the colonists. These acts included closing the harbor, more troops in Boston, which obviously made them very unhappy. The British controlled all colonial government in Massachusetts, which again made the Americans very unhappy. So because of these different acts, news is spreading very rapidly throughout the colonies. And militias began forming. Militias are like local military forces. I'm talking like out of the village, there would be all men between the ages of 16 to 50. If they could hold a gun, they would be part of militia. And they're kind of just there to protect and defend their homes. So they're beginning to form and train. Boston itself is beginning to stockpile weapons and ammo. Spies are like starting to kind of keep track of British movements, and not only that, they're keeping track of what British are planning to do next. So the spies have alerted that the British are planning on capturing a bunch of weapons and ammo outside of Boston in the city of, or not really city, the town of Concord. So because of that, 3 riders, Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Dr. Samuel Prescott, all rode out into the countryside to alert the citizens, shouting famously, the Redcoats are coming, the British are coming. This was a massive effort on their part. It's actually funny that we all know about Paul Revere's midnight ride, when in reality he failed drastically. You can see here, like, Paul Revere is the blue line. He actually was captured way before like he was actually useful. If you notice, he actually had a bunch of help. He was pretty much knocked off his horse and just told to go home. So it actually was, funny enough, up to Samuel Prescott and a couple other riders that are not named that actually did most of the legwork. Paul Revere is just a more famous guy. He's a very good writer, had a lot of good friends, and that's why we still talk about him to this day. So here's your first timeline. You're writing down at 0200, Lieutenant Colonel Smith lands his troops across the Charles River. You can see right here where the Charles River is. It's this blue area right here. I'm sorry, the red area right here. Red line is going to be for the British soldiers. So next thing I'd like you to do is decide, and here's your timeline number 2. Again, this is why I'm talking about pausing it. I'd like you to decide here a couple things. First, you're writing down timeline number 2. 0300, Colonel Smith learns that the colonists have learned of his plans. Does he, aka you, A, return to Boston and call off the raid, or B, send the rider to Boston asking for reinforcements and continuing your march? So you'll have to, on this sheet, obviously you have 0200, 0300 written down. Under choice number 1, you're going to write down what your choice was, and then what really happened. Don't cheat. It's more fun that way. I'd like to see you getting a couple wrong. You're going to get a couple wrong. You're trying to figure out what actually happened. Now, obviously, this first one's pretty straightforward. Colonel Smith does actually, of course, continue to go march towards Concord. He does send a rider back to Boston asking for reinforcements. So it was B, send the rider to Boston asking for reinforcements and continuing his march. He did not just run away. This is the most powerful military force in the world. They would not just run away from a very small little scare of some farmers with guns. 0400, Colonel Smith learns that hundreds of men are gathering at Lexington. Does he A, return to Boston and call off the raid, B, send an advance guard ahead to scout out Lexington? Advance guard, and this is just a side note, you can probably argue advance guard is probably about 100 men out of his forces, so he has a lot more men than that. He's about 1,200 around there. So he's going to send a small force ahead, or is he going to return to Boston? So this is 0400, and you have choice number 2. Pause it if you have to. You should have picked the correct answer, well I hope you did at least, which was B, send an advance guard ahead to scout out Lexington. 0430, Major Pitcairn advances with a guard to Lexington and finds about 70 armed militia blocking the road to Concord. So Major Pitcairn is like the lead guy in charge now. Colonel Smith is staying in the back. We're kind of just focusing on Major Pitcairn and his guard. Does Major Pitcairn A, order the Americans to lay down their weapons and move out of the way? B, pull back and wait for reinforcements to arrive? C, open fire on the Americans? Now, this is what actually happens, okay? I want you to think about, what do you think Major Pitcairn probably tries to do first? This is not what you would have done. You and Major Pitcairn might have had different ideas. This is you guessing what actually happens. Give me a second. Yes, no? Pause it if you have to. So he does actually do A. He orders the Americans to lay down their weapons and move out of the way. So this is actually from the Journal of an American Soldier there, James or Jonas Parker, whoever you're asking. He says, with British column a half-mile from Lexington, with us 70 Minutemen assembled on the common, I told my men to let the troops pass and don't harass them without begin first. As in, pretty much he's saying, don't shoot unless the British shoot first. Colonel Smith said Pitcairn's advance guard may have been fired on by Yankee horsemen before they got to Lexington. He ordered his men to load their weapons and put out flank protection, but tell soldiers on no account fire, not even attempt it without orders. He is now in combat posture, and his men are alarmed, told by Revere that 500 militiamen await them in Lexington. So Smith and Parker are both saying, don't shoot at unless you're being shot at first. So, funny enough, a shot rang out, and to this day we still don't know who did it. Major Pitcairn did not order it, nor did the rebel leader Jonas Parker. However, both sides began and continued to fire upon one another. Does Major Pitcairn A, immediately order a retreat, giving up the weapons and Concord? B, order your men to stop firing and continue to Concord? C, order your men to pursue and kill any rebels they find? Now again, what do you think Major Pitcairn did? Now, what would you do? Because I know some of you crazy people do some interesting things. What would Major Pitcairn do in this situation? So hopefully you already answered it. Hope you paused it. Yes, he did order his men to stop firing and continue to Concord. It was a very chaotic situation. You can actually kind of see it from the picture. They're in the middle of Lexington, like town square almost. So there's a lot of houses surrounding them. And a major theory that people like to believe is that there's a shooter in the house, presumably an American, who shot at the British first. We still don't know to this day. Both sides said the other side shot first. And that's just one of the mysteries we still don't know to this day. But either way, he did order his men to stop firing and continue to Concord. After the smoke cleared, at Lexington, 8 Americans were killed, including Jonas Parker, and 10 were wounded. About a mile and a half before Major Pitcairn reached Concord, armed Minutemen began to appear on the hillsides and in the woods. Does he, or do you, A, retreat back to Lexington and wait for reinforcements? B, send some of his men into the woods and hills to chase them off? Or C, call off the raid and return to Boston? Give you a second. Again, pause if you have to. So what Major Pitcairn does is a very rational thing. He did B, which is send some of his men into the woods and hills to chase them off. Very simple. He has the numbers. The colonists aren't really looking for a fight. They're kind of looking to annoy the British, but they're not trying to stand up to the British forces. So just some timeline stuff. 450, you're not writing this part. Pitcairn rides behind the militia and tells them to leave. And most do leave at this point. But this random shot was fired from somewhere. The British opened fire, or they opened their volley fire, which means they all fire in one line at the same time. 8 militiamen were killed, 11 were wounded. You're writing 0500 there. The rest you don't have to write. There was one British soldier that was wounded as well. There's a couple stories of the British that they were actually bayoneting like militia as they were laying there on the ground, like they were stabbing them on the grounds. Pitcairn and Smith were just just amazed by like the lack of gentlemanly discord that the British had at this battlefield, and they very quickly try to leave before like this escalated to a worse situation. All right, next up, as Major Pitcairn reaches Concord, he is informed that the Americans have supplies hidden outside the town in Barrett's Farm. Does he, A, send several companies are about 20 men, across the North Bridge to Barrett's Farm to destroy the supplies? Does he, B, quickly search Concord again and retreat? Or does he, C, burn the town and capture any rebels who remain? Give you a second here. Again, what does he do? Not what would you do? I know some of you would do some weird choices. Probably C is the weirdest one that I could think of. I don't see a point of burning the town down. He does, though, he does A, send several companies across the North Bridge to Barrett's Farm to destroy his supplies. Very rational. He keeps the majority of his men in Concord. The colonists are outside Concord. I mean, they're kind of just gathering out there, just watching. So he can't just leave the city. He can't just go to Barrett's Farm with all of his men. He has to kind of keep this this network of British soldiers all like together as best he can. So 0700, Colonel Smith's regulars are just British soldiers, arrive in Concord. Colonial militia withdraw across the North Bridge to await reinforcements. Very funny story, actually. Not funny, it's kind of sad, but it's funny at the same time. The innkeeper in Concord, he tried to block Major Pitcairn from entering the tavern because he had Cannington in the backyard. So Major Pitcairn knocked him down, like kind of just like punched him in the face. He took the cannons, and then they all sat down for breakfast. They ordered breakfast from this guy, and then he actually ends up paying for the breakfast, which is it's kind of funny how he could punch him in the face, but he can still pay for his breakfast and treat him like a regular person. So yeah. Next up, Major Pitcairn is approaching the North Bridge, where rebels have again gathered. Some of his men are ahead on their way to Barrett's Farm. But now these rebels stand in the way of him and his men who have hopefully found the weapons. Does he, A, send the rider back to Concord asking for reinforcements, B, retreat to Concord leaving the men at Barrett's Farm to take care of themselves, or C, form your men in a firing line and attack the rebels in arm? So I just want to point out where Barrett's Farm is. Concord is it's like right here. Barrett's Farm's up the road. So you can kind of see like there's like a gap of like where exactly the farm is and the British are. So this is an issue. They have to kind of figure out what they're going to do here, because if they don't get the men from Barrett's Farm, that means that those men are kind of stuck on their own. So what would you do? Send the rider back to Concord, ask for reinforcements, retreat to Concord, leaving the men at Barrett's Farm, form your men in firing line, attack the rebels in arm. So Major Pitcairn's been very careful so far, and he's still being careful. He does A, send the rider back to Concord asking for reinforcements. He only has his advanced guard. He has about 100 men. On the other side of the bridge, he can't quite tell how many men are on the other side of the bridge, but it's definitely more than 100 at this point, and he's getting a little nervous. So, that being said, and here's the North Bridge if you're curious. This is not the exact North Bridge. That was there in 1775, but it's the recreation as best as possible. So next up, the Americans begin to move in military formation towards the bridge, advancing on the British soldiers. Does Major Pitcairn, A, immediately retreat back to Concord, B, begin firing on the approaching Americans, or C, order a bayonet charge on the Americans, hoping to scare them off? So what does Pitcairn do? He's been cautious so far, but now they're advancing towards the British. Like, what does Pitcairn do to remedy the situation? You should pause it if you have to. He ends up doing B. He actually begins firing on the approaching Americans. He does not retreat. He does not charge. He stands his ground. So, 0830, at the North Bridge, the British had about 115 men. Militia, now about 400. So, there's a little gap right here. There is like the appeal for reinforcements. Colonel Smith, though, is back in Concord. It's a couple miles away, so it takes some time to advance towards like where Pitcairn is on this bridge. The militia, they actually saw like the British burning the supplies they found in Concord, and they thought they were burning the town. So that's why the militia started advancing into towards Concord. By the way, 0900, the reinforcements that we requested hours and hours and hours ago, they just left Boston. They should have left 4 hours earlier. They should have left around like 0500, somewhere around there. But they just got tied up. I mean, things happen like that, unfortunately, for the British. All right, next up, the firing kills several Americans, but they return fire and kill 3 redcoats and wound 9. The British panic and begin to retreat. Does Major Pitcairn A. try to keep your men in line, continuing the order of fire? B. Order an immediate retreat to Concord? Or C. Order a bayonet charge and hope your men will obey? Just want to remind you, bayonet charge is when, again, they fix those knives on the ends of the guns and they charge, like they run at the other side. It's a scary thing. It's not something like you can, for both sides, it's scary. It's not something you can easily do, and it takes a lot of courage to do that, so that's a intimidating one. Major Pitcairn, though, in this situation, if you need to pause to do so, he does B. He orders an immediate retreat to Concord. He realizes he's outnumbered 4-1. The British are taking casualties. They're tired. They've been walking all day so far. He knows he can't just beat these Americans like when there's quadruple the amount than what he has. So he retreats back to Concord. So 0930, a couple things happen. First of all, the men that were at Barrett's farm do start working their way back. They have to kind of go around a different way that they first went there. The British do fire warning shots above the colonists, then a direct volley into the colonists. 2 people were killed, Captain Isaac Davis, who was the leader, and the guy who's playing the flute, which is I feel bad for him. The militia, though, they wound 12 British soldiers that shooting back, and they kill 3 people. The colonists were known for shooting at officers because they wore a brighter red, and out of the 8 officers that were at the bridge, 4 of them were hit instantly. So with the officers being hit, that usually causes panic, and the British were forced to retreat from this bridge. Next up, on the way back to Concord, the British soldiers at Barrett's farm are also returning to Concord. American rebels are also gathering in and around Concord. Does Major Pitcairn A. order his troops to fortify positions in Concord and wait for reinforcements? Does he B. sound out some officers to talk with the Americans to arrange a surrender, as in the British are going to give up? Or does he C. hire wagons to carry the wounded and dead back to Boston and begin a retreat? So I want you to think about, before you answer this, why were the British here, and what is their next step? What do you think would make sense for them? So if you have to hit pause, do so now. The British were here to get the weapons. They got the weapons. It's time to go. There's no reason to be here anymore. They know better, so they end up doing C. They hire a bunch of wagons, and they start carrying the wounded and dead back to Boston, and they began a general fighting retreat. At 1200, there's your next timeline. The Redcoats begin to leave Concord. On the way to Lexington, rebels open fire into marching British from all sides. Soldiers are falling, killed, and wounded. Does Major Pitcairn A. keep the column together and move as fast as possible? B. raise a white flag and hope the Americans will accept the surrender? Or C. send out soldiers to surprise Americans waiting in ambush points? This is an interesting one. Do you give up? Do you stay together? Or do you try to spread out a little bit? What Pitcairn does, and stop it if you have to, he sends out soldiers to surprise Americans waiting in ambush points. Him and Colonel Smith quickly realize they are one big blob that the Americans can easily follow. If they start spreading their line out a little bit more and attack back, it gives them a little bit more flexibility and allows them to move without being attacked, which is obviously something they'd much prefer. So it's a long walk back. It's about 20-25 miles. And they're walking, so it takes a long time. It's something that they want to be able to do quickly and carefully. So 1230, you can actually see what Merriman's Corner is. It's this thick stone wall that the colonists have massed behind. This is the road that they would actually have to take back. You can see right there. This isn't from the actual day. I think this picture is from the 1800s. But you can see why this is a very deadly position. This is it's a bad situation right now. The British have about 1,200 men, but they've been walking all day. The colonists number around 1,100 in that one area, and they have been fighting all day. Both sides, they're exhausted at this point. Next up, every house that the soldiers pass have rebels shooting at them. The British soldiers are beginning to run out of ammunition because they usually have about 30 bullets. Discipline's breaking down, and the men are panicky. Does Major Pitcairn A. force the men to keep moving? The town of Lexington is not far away. B. divide the force. Let those who are able to move ahead quickly. Let the others rest and fend for themselves. Or C. surrender immediately to save his men's lives. What does Major Pitcairn do? What he does is A. force the men to keep moving. Town of Lexington is not far away. His hopes, and he's actually right about this, is he wants to catch those reinforcements from Boston at Lexington with his men coming back from Concord. They can kind of link up, get the fresh men to help out, and they can all retreat back to Boston together. So a lot of stuff happens like throughout the afternoon. This is where things kind of slow down because they're all kind of just walking at this point, and they're all exhausted. The biggest point was at 14:30, which is 2:30. The regulars actually break ranks and run. Like the British themselves are running away. Like they're not just retreating, organized. They are running. Major Pitcairn is actually shot here. He does survive this. Like he does survive this wound. But he is shot, so he has a hard time like taking command. Colonel Smith's pretty much in charge by himself, and he's been a little bit flaky this whole time. So unfortunately for them, like that leaves them with a not great commander. But they do link up with the reinforcements of 900 men outside Lexington, and they're able to be able to fend off the Americans a little better. They're a little bit more organized at this point. All right, this is it. At about 15:30, the British leave Lexington, begin the 15-mile march to Boston. The countryside's filled with stone fences and other places where the rebels hide and fire the British. The entire march is one long battle, soldiers falling continuously. The British reach a split in the road to go through Cambridge, whose roads connect to Boston, or they go towards Charleston, which requires boats to get to Boston. What does now Colonel Smith do? Does Colonel Smith take the road through Cambridge, or does he march to Charleston and take a boat back? This one, there's actually a right answer. I know you're like, I don't know, this is unfair. Think about what the British did when they left Boston, because they can do the same thing going back to Boston. So if you had the pause to do so, I wouldn't say you should cheat and go back. I think you can just work off this. They actually end up marching to Charlestown and take a boat to Boston. It's lucky they do that because at 1800, you're not writing this part down, the militia actually took apart that bridge in Cambridge. They were hoping that the British would go through Cambridge. They didn't know the British took boats out of Charlestown, and the militia wrote it saying like, okay, let's let the British walk for a while, like we gave up. But we're going to let them go into in the Cambridge. Once they get to that river crossing, when the bridge is up, they have them cornered. So it was a good plan. Unfortunate for the militia that the British took boats. By 1900, the British reached Charlestown Peninsula. They've been marching for hours and hours and hours for a very long distance, and I mean this is probably some of the worst days of their lives. They've been walking for at least 17 hours. And after all that, it takes them 3 hours to get back into Boston. But the countryside's alive with colonists and patriots. The battle's over, and the British did succeed in destroying these arms in Concord. But there are thousands upon thousands of Americans surrounding the city now. This is an armed uprising, suddenly. It's unorganized and kind of ugly in a lot of ways. There's people like just fighting everywhere. I mean, this is a very confusing situation, but this is the start of an uprising that becomes known as the American Revolution. You can see that the moving battle throughout the entirety of the day. You can see like the thick line coming from Charlestown. You can see like them going all the way to North Bridge, and then working their way back through Lexington, and then retreating back to Charlestown with the dotted line. So this is a long day, and you can see all these explosions signifying the different battles that happened here. Here's a bridge, by the way, that they were deconstructing. They got unlucky. It's a good idea, but they just couldn't pull it off, unfortunately for them. And now with the British back in Boston, you can see Boston has a very, very narrow entrance. There's one little thing called the Boston Neck. That's like the one little entrance into Boston. But otherwise, the British are kind of like stuck in Boston. They have a lot of soldiers there, but they don't really have an ability to get out. And that's their next step. That's going to be what we're going to be looking at next. You can see here as well the casualties. It's not a massive battle, but the British end up losing, obviously. But it shows that the colonists were clearly ready to go. They had a lot of fighting spirit in them. And hopefully you did well in this. It's kind of tricky to answer these questions. I mean, these questions are not easy, especially because you don't really quite know what they would do. It's sometimes you just guessing. So I hope you like this. I love this lesson. I think the battle itself is really cool. What I want you to do next, again, you can do it tomorrow, you can do it today, whatever you want to do. You have 2 days for this. I'd like you to watch a video on from the series John Adams. It's actually John Adams like encountering parts of the battle of Lexington and Concord because he lived in Boston, he lived in the area. So it's him kind of encountering it, and I have a couple questions for you as well. So again, it's a 5-minute video. There's a couple questions. So you should have the timeline, you should have your choices, and you should have the questions as well, okay? If you need anything, let me know. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.